Speaker Nancy Pelosi announcing the formal impeachment inquiry into President Trump. The speaker said that a whistleblower complaint from the U.S. intelligence community about the president became a tipping point. The complaint centers around a phone call Mr. Trump had with Ukraine's president back in July. And during the call, President Trump discussed former Vice President and 2020 presidential candidate Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Mr. Trump is reported to have asked the Ukrainian counterpart to look into corruption allegations involving the Bidens in Ukraine. Hunter Biden did work on the board of a Ukrainian gas company, but there's no evidence that surfaced to support Mr. Trump's claims of corruption by the Bidens. Keir Dougall joins me now. He's a CBSN legal contributor, also a former assistant U.S. attorney for New York's Eastern District, to talk about this. So thank you so much for joining us, Keir.
Good morning.
Good morning. So let's talk about, first off, this idea of an impeachment inquiry. Just sort of explain to people how the process works, because this is kind of like an opening salvo, if you will.
Sure. So the Constitution has a provision in it that says that the House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment. And that's just about all that the Constitution says. So the rest of it is a matter of practice and history. And so in prior impeachments, it has started along the lines of a committee, whether it's a select committee or whether it started in the Judiciary Committee, considered articles of impeachment, done an investigation, and then made a recommendation, which is then voted upon by the full House. But that doesn't necessarily have to happen. Articles of impeachment could just go directly to the House floor and be considered directly without committee involvement. So we really don't have a lot of guidance in the Constitution.
I want to play a little bit of sound from Nancy Pelosi, not from last night, but a previous event that she was at, where she talks about this phone conversation and the concept of quid pro quo. Let's play that.
It's really important to know this. There is no requirement there be a quid pro quo in the conversation. If the president brings up he wants them to investigate something, that's of his political opponent. That is self-evident that it is not right.
So we know that aid to Ukraine was held up. We know from the president's own mouth that he spoke to the Ukrainian president and he spoke about corruption and the Bidens. The bridge is the quid pro quo. Was it a conversation about, you will get this aid if you investigate the Bidens? That's what we don't know. She's saying it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so she's making the kind of argument that a prosecutor would make in front of a jury. So the question then is, in this particular conversation, is there a discussion of a quid pro quo? A quid pro quo, if it's even required, and I think you can argue that it's not even required, that you can commit an impeachable offense, you can threaten the national security, you can commit abuse of office without demanding a quid pro quo, just straight out. But in this case, I think what she's saying is, for this particular conversation, we don't have to have the explicit words of, I'll give you this if you give me that. Often where there's wrongdoing, a wrongful agreement, the parties don't write it down in a contract the way lawyers do. It's done with an understanding. Conversations happen either beforehand or through surrogates or later, so that there's simply an understanding. I'm certain that the president of the Ukraine understood that the money that the Ukraine was expecting for their military hadn't arrived yet.
Right.
I'm certain that or I would be surprised if he didn't understand that. And so in that context, the question of, hey, you know, by the way, why haven't you done this for me? That takes on, you know, a completely different cast, a completely different air. So I think that's what the speaker was referring to.
And we should, you know, remind people what the president says, at least what he said initially, was that he was very concerned about corruption in Ukraine. This is a president who ran on wiping out corruption in Ukraine, and the idea of American money going to a corrupt country was something that he is responsible for sort of being a check on. So that's his sort of what he's saying. So we heard from Adam Schiff that the whistleblower in this case is apparently eager to talk to his committee. We know that the D&I director is going to be talking. When it comes to appearances in front of other committees that are investigating the president and his administration, the White House has been very heavy-handed successfully at stopping people from appearing, or at least giving them instructions to be challenging witnesses. Now that we have this impeachment inquiry, does that change anything?
I think it does. You've heard Vice President Biden speaking about how the simple act of stonewalling the Congress across the board is itself an abuse of office. Our constitutional system has checks and balances in it, and it expects the two branches to allow oversight and those things to occur. So you'd have a situation where, is it possible that the president could classify, let's say, everything that the whistleblower has said, or take other steps to try to prevent the whistleblower from giving testimony before Congress or other evidence to the public? At that point, the question then becomes, is this simply an act of stonewalling that appears to be for the president's personal benefit, here now perhaps to avoid impeachment itself? So, you know, I think the question or the problem for a president who would refuse across the board to allow that constitutional system to work is, does that itself become an abuse of office that rises to an impeachable offense?
Okay, Keir, I want to ask you very, very quickly. The president said he's going to release a transcript of the conversation. We don't know if there's an audio recording. Does that make a difference, do you think?
It makes it, as a former prosecutor, I can tell you I would not want a transcript if there's an underlying thing that it's a transcription of. So if there is a recording, I would want the recording. We don't know whether the Ukrainians perhaps have one. We don't know whether the United States has one. You definitely would want to have all that nuance, the context, the tone of voice, all of the things that we exchange as people when we communicate, you know, directly with each other. You capture that in a tape. And it's also hearing the president's voice himself, instead of having somebody else read the transcript, is an extraordinarily powerful piece of evidence.
Keir Dougall, thank you very much.
Thank you.